There is a fracture running long between Isaac and Ishmael. It does not appear on maps. It does not dissolve into history. It only breathes through every gust of desert wind. Through the church bells tolling in time, with the call to Azan echoing off the silver domes of Jerusalem. This is not a war, it is a ritual cursed. To the eyes of politics, it is a struggle for land, but to the eyes of God, it is a rupture between two bloodlines, between sacred promise and betrayal, stretching across millennia. The voice that tells this is low, soft, but heavy like the gates of Jerusalem closing. There are secrets not written in history books, but carved into the skulls of children who have never seen the land of their ancestors. There are wounds that do not bleed but leak scripture. And there between three holy hills, where Abraham nearly struck down his own son to please a voice from the sky, the story begins. Dawn had not yet come when Hagar heard the footsteps of an angel moving through sand. She was weeping not from pain, but because she knew she was giving birth to a division. Ishmael, her son, the firstborn of Abraham's blood, opened his eyes in the wilderness like a door swinging open into exile, into rejection, into a nation fated before it had a name. Hagar was not a wife, just an Egyptian handmaid given to Abraham in the years Sarah could not bear a child. But from her womb, the first bloodline passed from the patriarch, and in that moment, two nations were born, one from sanctioned love, the other from endurance. In the book of Genesis, God appeared to Abraham and said, "I will give this land from the Nile to the Euphrates to your descendants." But those descendants, who are they? Sarah, aged and barren, laughed when she heard the promise, a laugh dry and brittle, like desert wind on bone. But she gave birth to Isaac, and when Isaac came, the covenant was carved into stone that only his line would be the chosen people. Hagar and Ishmael were cast out, not from hatred, but because their presence blurred the sharp edge of the promise. In the wilderness of Paran, Ishmael grew into a warrior, his hand against all, and all hands against him. Scripture recorded this, "I will make of him a great nation," but it never said that nation would have land. It never said they'd be allowed to return to the place where the promise began. From that moment on, Canaan was no longer just earth, it became inheritance, power, the visible judgment of who God chooses and who he casts aside. Every inch of it, every grain of dust holds a question still unanswered. Who is the true son? Who is the heir? And thousands of years later, the children throwing stones in Gaza, the ones screaming in resettlement camps in the West Bank, they are living inside the aftershock of a sacred decision made in the time of the patriarchs. This is not history. This is blood that's still flowing. Beyond the Wailing Wall, Jewish elders rock with the rhythm of the Torah. This side of the barbed fence, Palestinian children whisper prayers beneath the roar of fighter jets. One side believes this land was given by God forever. The other believes their ancestors lived here before that promise was ever written. Two faiths, one land, no room for two destinies. So listen not with your ears, but with your bones, because the ancestors are screaming in the wind. And the blade Abraham raised on Mount Moriah still has not come down. May 14th, 1948, on a windswept afternoon in Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion stood before a room and declared, "The state of Israel is established. No thunder cracked, no angels descended, but in the minds of millions of Jews." That moment was when God opened his eyes again. The promise once spoken to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob had waited nearly 2,000 years. Now it surged like spring water bursting from stone. They called it a return, but others called it a catastrophe. Nakba, in the same breath that birthed the promise anew. Over 700,000 Palestinians were forced from their homes, driven from their villages, their orchards, their ancestors' wells. Wooden doors left unlocked, plates still unwashed on the table. They were never allowed to return. One side saw a miracle, the other saw a hollowing. 1948, the year God returned. But to whom? In Ezekiel 37, the Lord tells the prophet, "I will breathe into you, and you shall live." The Jews who survived the Holocaust didn't read that verse with their eyes. They read it with skin that still carried the scent of the camps. They read it with numbers branded into their arms. And they believed that nationhood was the resurrection of a people long dead. But as they built tents, raised homes, formed a government, the curse of Ishmael rose from the dust again. Because no promise is reborn without a price in blood. Then came 1967. 6 days and history turned. In a lightning war, Israel seized Gaza, the West Bank, and most of all, East Jerusalem, where the ancient temple once stood, where the Wailing Wall still weeps, where Scripture calls it the city of King David. Jerusalem was no longer divided. Israel named it the eternal capital. But others saw the words of Zechariah stirring. In the last days, Jerusalem will be a cup that makes the surrounding nations reel, and all who touch her will be wounded. This city is not just pulled between two peoples, it is pulled between two prophecies, one of restoration, one of ruin. If 1948 was the day Israel rose, then 1967 was the day Jerusalem became a spiritual battlefield. From that moment, the story no longer read as Jew versus Arab. It became a people of promise facing those who've lived on the land for thousands of years, but whose names appear nowhere in sacred text. The fight was no longer about land. It became about meaning, about identity, about who is the rightful son, about who is written out of God's genealogy. Jerusalem, where the fire still burns on the altar, was now framed by tanks, fences, and tear gas. Neither side would step back, because both believed they were fulfilling divine will. But what did God promise, and to whom? That question remains unanswered. And each night, on the golden dome of Al-Aqsa, dew falls like the tears of those long gone who once watched Abraham raise the blade over Isaac, only to see that fire spread across the earth. Jerusalem has no clear borders. No one can say where it begins or where it ends, because every stone here is part nightmare, part sacred dream. The Jews call it Yerushalayim, city of peace. The Arabs call it Al-Quds, the Holy One. Christians believe this is where Christ was crucified and will one day return. But beneath the dust of thousands of years of pilgrimage, of blood, of prayer, of fire, Jerusalem is not a city. It is a bleeding scar between three faiths, three promises, and three rejections. In the old city, every step is a chapter of Scripture. At the Wailing Wall, Jews press prayers into the cracks of stone, believing God still listens from the very place He once dwelled. From the radiant golden dome of Al-Aqsa, the Azan rises at dawn, a proclamation that this mountain belongs to no nation, but to the Most High. At Golgotha, the skull, where the cross once stood, pilgrims weep silently in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But no one can deny this. Jerusalem is a heart split in two, and that heart is twitching, no longer strong enough to feed 3 souls. In the East, Palestinian families live under the shadow of courts and bulldozers. A single paper can erase 3 generations. An eviction order can uproot an olive tree that stood 100 years. In the West, settlements stretch wider like new arteries pushing into an old body. Walls rise, soldiers stand guard, but the city's sighs slip through. No sword can cut the wailing from a temple yet to be rebuilt. Nothing stops the lament of a city in agony. Jerusalem lives in 3 times at once. The past, where David danced before the Ark of the Covenant. The present, where children wear helmets just to get to school. The future, where prophecy says, everything will end. But will that ending be grace or apocalypse? In the book of Revelation, the final return of Christ is not to New York, not to the Vatican, but to Jerusalem, to the Mount of Olives where he once wept, to the Golden Gate where many believe he will enter once again. But today, that gate is sealed shut. A Muslim cemetery blocks its path, as if history itself were trying to stop prophecy, as if man were trying to control the uncontrollable. Jerusalem is the living proof of a world that refuses to bow to fate. A place where 3 religions kneel, but face in 3 different directions. And every time a new stone is laid, another prayer is buried in silence. There is no map that draws Palestine correctly, because every map is an erasure, an overwrite, a denial. Palestinians were not just expelled from their villages, they were erased from language, from textbooks, from the global system of recognition. A people made into shadows, no nation, no passport, no gate to return through. They call themselves Sha'ab al-Manhab, the people who were robbed. Not just of land, but of memory. After 1948, more than 700,000 Palestinians became refugees. They lived in makeshift camps in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, and the West Bank. Each camp became a temporary city, but the sorrow was permanent. Children were born in canvas tents and died in canvas tents. 3 generations have grown up never seeing the house their grandparents once described. And in their hearts, the only map that remains is a story. Our home was near the orange tree. There was a well, Sweetwater. You'd love it. In front of the door stood an olive tree. We planted it ourselves. But those places are now parking lots, supermarkets, gated settlements. They don't call it migration. They call it Nakba, the catastrophe. And that catastrophe never ended. It lives on in every blocked harvest, in every roof torn down, in every knock at 3 a.m. A people not allowed a flag, not allowed an army, not allowed borders, only a single-title refugee. For decades, Palestinians have asked for one thing: let us return. The right of return is the shared dream every Palestinian child is raised with. Not to reclaim, but to embrace a father's grave, to kiss the olive tree that was cut down, to stitch the map back together from scraps of memory. But the world has grown used to silence when the pain comes without a country. Pain without a flag rarely makes it into the UN record. Palestinian dreams, no matter how resilient, are locked behind fences, checkpoints, and concrete walls 8 meters high. They build walls not to protect a nation, but to imprison a dream before it can take shape. If Palestine is a country, it's drawn in ashes. If it is a prayer, it's spoken through broken teeth. If it is a road, it always leads to where you're not allowed. And still, they keep walking, because their ancestors once wandered the desert for 40 years. And the promise, though handed to another, still echoes in every lullaby. One day, you will see Jericho. One day, we will return to Jaffa. Jerusalem is not just geography. It is the final doorway in the architecture of God. And the war here is no longer between 2 peoples, but between 2 eternal forces. One side believes the light is coming, the other believes the night never ended, but both are preparing for the last battle. In Zechariah, chapter 14, it is written on that day, "The nations will gather against Jerusalem, and the feet of the Lord shall stand on the Mount of Olives." It is no coincidence that every major conflict of the 21st century has Jerusalem at its center. It is no coincidence that every stone here is examined under the lamp of prophecy. For if God is to return, then so will his adversary, and both will choose this city as their battleground. To many who watch the end times, Jerusalem is a ticking clock. Every riot, a number. Every failed peace deal, a second past. Every fallen child, a final bell ringing. The Battle of Armageddon, as foretold in Revelation, will unfold not far from the valley of Megiddo, just north of Jerusalem. In the visions of prophets, this city will be surrounded by the forces of the world, and then set ablaze by fire from on high. In that hour, there will be no more Israel or Palestine. Only heaven against hell, promise against rebellion, the scriptures opened to their last page. Today, in Jerusalem, they build checkpoints but cannot checkpoint fate. They draft maps for peace but cannot map the human heart. For some forces do not belong to men, and some conspiracies are not written in ink but in blood. The true battle has long since begun. Soldiers patrol with rifles before the Temple Mount, but behind them walk the ancient souls of prophets, of kings, of the crucified, and of those who detonate for faith. Jerusalem is speaking with the apocalypse, not with words but with thunder. Behold, he comes with the clouds, and every eye shall see him, even those who pierced him. Revelation 1. Quarto answeren. And if that day truly comes, then every bullet, every wall, every political map will turn to dust. Only one city will remain, burning bright in the dark where final forces decide the fate of man. Jerusalem, where all things began, and where all things will end. No one ever imagined that the exiled could write scripture. No one believed children born behind barbed wire could behold visions. But from mud, dust, and tears, new prophecies are taking form. Not on parchment, but on fences, on crater lids, on the foreheads of the ones who survived. A new generation of Palestinians is rising not just with stones in their hands, but with the knowledge that they are witnesses. Witnesses to a history unrecognized, to a sorrow unrecorded, and to a future never allowed to be written. But they write. They write in images, in refugee camp rap, in poems carved into utility poles. They write with their eyes captured through phone cameras that leap over sensors, cross borders, and reach millions of souls searching for truth. And in that moment, prophecy begins to shift. Once, only Jewish prophets, Christian apostles, or Islamic mystics dared speak of the end days. Now, children in Gaza speak of it too, not in theology, but in bare, burning truth. We are not afraid of the end times because we live in them every day. The Bible may be closed, but history has not put down its pen, and the hands once stripped of rights are holding the pen again. From the Balata camp in the West Bank to the ruins of Khan Yunis, they are building libraries from rubble. Each book is not just a story. It is an indictment sent straight to the heavens. What did God promise? And if that promise brings pain to others, can it still be called righteous? Once, those questions were deemed blasphemous. Now, they sit at the center of global dialogue. From Harvard to Ramallah. From churches in South Carolina to classrooms lit by kerosene lamps in Jenin, people are reading prophecy again. Not through magnifying glasses, but through broken hearts. Something is shifting, not power, but the right to speak. When those once labeled outsiders begin to tell their story, the story itself changes. It is no longer the chronicle of a chosen people. It becomes the survival song of the ones left behind. Between concrete walls and tear gas, they still dance dabke. Beneath the bombs, they still hold weddings. And among the old prophecies, a new one is forming. We do not need to be chosen. We only need to be seen, to be heard, to live. Jerusalem may be the end of every old prediction, but for them it is the beginning of a new scripture. Not divinely dictated, but written with blood, tears, and a faith that refused to die. Jerusalem has heard enough words. It has absorbed enough blood. And now the holiest city on earth has grown as silent as the grave of God himself. No more angels taking form. No more tongues of fire descending upon temples. Only concrete walls quivering with every falling bomb. Only worshippers still kneeling, unsure if he still listens. In that silence, another voice emerges. Not the voice of God, but of doubt. If you promised this land to one people, why is it soaked with the blood of another? If this is holy ground, why do children die outside its gates? The questions spill out like floodwaters from a broken dam. But no answers come. God does not deny. He does not explain. He remains silent, as if letting humanity write its own final chapter. In the book of Job, there is a moment when Job cries out in the wilderness, "Where were you when I was crushed by your own hand?" And in this present landscape, Job is no longer one man. He is a people, a multitude standing in ruins, arms raised to the sky, mouths too tired to cry, but eyes still asking. What are you waiting for? Jerusalem today is a play where God refuses to appear in the final act. No divine intervention. Only humans twisting scripture to suit their ideals. Leaders invoke his name in speeches. Warriors write his name on missiles. But he does not answer, does not speak, does not stop a single bullet. The silence of the divine is sometimes the most ruthless judgment of all. And in that silence, a new kind of faith is born. Not built on miracles, not waiting for voices from clouds, but built on each other. A hand offering water to someone who's lost their home. A song louder than sirens. A whispered prayer in the heart with no need for witness. If God no longer speaks, then we will live as if we are his final word. In that darkness, no prophets appear. Only ordinary people exhausted, but unbroken. Abandoned, but not turned to stone. Cast out from the promised land, but still pitching tents, lighting fires, and telling stories to wide-eyed children with tear-streaked faces. And perhaps that is the last faith that remains. Not faith that he will return, but faith that even if he never does, we will keep living as if he is still watching. Two destinies cannot dwell on the same strip of earth. Two promises cannot both be fulfilled in a single lifetime. One side believes this land is the fulfillment of a covenant. The other sees it as history's most brutal rejection. How do you reconcile when one's existence is the denial of the other's? Dozens of peace accords have been signed, from Oslo to Camp David, from road maps to two-state visions. But every handshake carried a dagger behind the back. Every embrace echoed with gunfire the very next day. Not because people do not want peace, but because peace demands the surrender of part of one's destiny. And who dares surrender a promise their ancestors died to preserve? Who dares look into a child's eyes and say, "You will not walk into Jerusalem as the scriptures foretold"? The Israeli fears that if they let go, they'll be exiled again. The Palestinian knows that if they let go, they may never have land again. The righteous fear on both sides is killing every chance to trust. Some call the solution a partition. Some dream of a shared state. Some no longer dream at all. Because the dream, after centuries of being twisted, has turned to nightmare. Every time a deal nears, someone sets off a bomb. Every time recognition draws near, a child is shot in the street. They say Jerusalem cannot be the capital of two nations. But if no one lets go, then it will become the grave of both. Reconciliation does not begin with politics. It begins with sitting down to hear the story of someone you once hated. When a Jew listens to a Palestinian mother speak of her lost child, when a Palestinian reads the diary of a Holocaust survivor, when both begin to see we are not enemies, but survivors of two different curses, there is no perfect solution. Only the courage to live together without fully understanding each other. Only forgiveness, not because the other deserves it, but because the heart can't endure another blood-soaked cycle. Jerusalem may be the heart of the world, but if it cannot learn to share a rhythm, it will break. Reconciliation or ruin? The answer is not in the maps, not in the protocols. It lives in every soul who walks through Jerusalem carrying a choice. To live as if destiny is immovable, or to live as if love can rewrite prophecy. There comes a time when the storyteller stops speaking, not because the words are gone, but because each word now must be paid for in real blood. Jerusalem has reached its final chapter, not in scripture, but in the hearts of those who've lost everything and still pray. We have told the tale of two bloodlines, of children born beneath rubble yet carrying prophecy in their bones, of old men, hands trembling, lighting candles beside the wailing wall, of mothers with no voice left to sing lullabies, only breathless gasps as sirens scream again. We've walked together from Mount Moriah to refugee camps, from the temple to checkpoints, from the first promise to the final silence. And if you are still here, still reading, still listening, then your soul, too, has passed through this ritual. So what is Jerusalem? The center of a covenant, or the place where destiny bled through the page, a gate for God's return, or a mirror reflecting humanity's failure to uphold its own faith. Perhaps it is all of these, and that is why it is so sacred, so wounding, untouchable, yet impossible to look away. The closing is not peace, it is not victory. It is a question. After all we've lost, what have we not yet dared to believe in? Perhaps each other. Perhaps the power to rewrite fate. Perhaps a silence carrying hope. For if blood still falls, then the story cannot end. But if the storyteller has run out of tears, then it is the listener who must go on telling. And if you are still here, then maybe your soul has just been touched at its deepest point. At Tales of Black, every story is a ritual, a reminder that some memories do not live in books but in blood and bone. If something in this story moved you, share it with someone else who's wandering. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter. And if you carry a legend, a memory, or a haunting, leave it in the comments. Who knows? Your story may become the next ritual. Note, the story you just heard is a reimagining drawn from folklore, legend, or historical, spiritual, and religious elements that may be real or fictionalized. Tales of Black does not aim to divide, condemn, or distort, but to awaken forgotten memories and rekindle the voices of souls silenced by history. We honor all faiths, all cultures, and all paths in search of truth. If something in this story does not align with your beliefs or values, remember, this is a telling, not an accusation.